I never imagined that clearing snow off my own driveway would land me in the crosshairs of the most vindictive homeowners association president in Jefferson County, Colorado. But here I was, staring at a $500 fine for what they called unauthorized clearing methods. My name is Reinhardt, and I had been living in Pine Ridge Estates for 3 years before everything went sideways. The development sat at the base of the Rocky Mountains, about 40 minutes west of Denver, where the snowfall could get heavy enough to bury a pickup truck by February. I ran a small snow removal business on the side. Nothing fancy, just me and my trusty plow truck helping out neighbors and local businesses during the winter months. The work paid well, and I genuinely enjoyed being out there in the crisp mountain air, watching the sunrise paint the snow-capped peaks orange and pink. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in early January. I had just finished clearing my driveway using my truck-mounted plow, pushing the snow into neat banks on either side like I had done dozens of times before. The method was efficient, quick, and left a perfectly clean surface. I was hosing down the plow blade when I noticed Patricia Brennan marching toward my property. Her face already twisted into that expression I had come to recognize as her "I'm about to ruin someone's day" look. Patricia was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman with short blonde hair that never seemed to move in the wind, probably cemented in place with half a can of hairspray. She wore designer workout clothes despite never actually working out, and she clutched a leather-bound binder against her chest like it contained the secrets to the universe. In reality, it just held copies of the HOA bylaws, which she had apparently memorized cover to cover. "Lucas Reinhardt," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning quiet. "We need to discuss your flagrant violation of community standards." I turned off the hose and walked over to the property line, keeping my expression neutral. "Morning, Patricia. What violation are we talking about?" She flipped open her binder with practiced efficiency, her manicured fingernails stabbing at a page. Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection B clearly states that all snow removal within the community must be performed using hand tools or approved contractors. Mechanical plowing devices operated by residents are strictly prohibited. I blinked at her, trying to process what I was hearing. "You're telling me I can't use my own plow truck on my own driveway?" "That is precisely what I'm telling you," Patricia said, her lips pursing. "The HOA board voted on this rule 2 years ago. Mechanical plowing causes unsightly snow banks, damages landscaping, and creates an inconsistent aesthetic throughout the community. 2 years ago, I've been plowing my driveway every winter since I moved in. Nobody said anything before." "We're saying something now," she replied coolly. "You'll receive a formal citation in the mail. The fine is $500 for the first offense. Subsequent violations will result in escalating penalties." My jaw clenched, but I kept my voice level. "This is ridiculous. You're fining me for clearing snow off my own property in the most efficient way possible." Patricia's expression hardened. "The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Reinhardt. Perhaps you should have familiarized yourself with the bylaws before purchasing property here. Payment is due within 30 days. She spun on her heel and marched back toward her house, leaving me standing there in disbelief. I glanced around the neighborhood, noticing that several other driveways had clearly been plowed with mechanical equipment. Either Patricia was targeting me specifically, or she was about to make a lot of enemies. The citation arrived 3 days later, printed on official HOA letterhead with Patricia's signature at the bottom. $500 for unauthorized snow removal methodology. The letter included helpful instructions for paying the fine online or by check, along with a reminder that failure to pay would result in additional penalties and potential legal action. I called an emergency meeting with my neighbor, Frank Morrison, who lived 2 houses down. Frank was a retired firefighter with a thick gray mustache and a no-nonsense attitude. He had also been plowing his driveway with a small ATV-mounted blade for years. "You get one of these too?" I asked, waving the citation as I stood on his porch. Frank nodded grimly. "Yesterday." I called Patricia to ask what the hell she was thinking, and she told me to review the bylaws or face escalating consequences. "Can you believe that? She's lost her mind," I muttered. "We need to fight this. Get the rest of the board involved." "Good luck with that," Frank said. Patricia handpicked everyone on the board. They're all her friends, and they rubber stamp whatever she wants. I've seen it happen before with other issues. I spent the weekend researching the HOA bylaws and Colorado state law regarding homeowners associations. What I discovered was both enlightening and infuriating. While the HOA did have the authority to enforce architectural and maintenance standards, there were limitations. More importantly, I found an interesting clause buried in the covenants that had been established when Pine Ridge Estates was first developed. The original developer had designated certain roads within the community as fire access routes. These roads were private, maintained by the HOA, but they had to meet specific width and clearance requirements as mandated by the Jefferson County Fire Department. During winter, these roads needed to be kept clear of snow to ensure emergency vehicle access. The HOA had contracted with local snow removal companies in the past, but the service was expensive and often slow to respond. Here's where things got interesting. For the past 2 winters, I had been voluntarily plowing these fire access roads with my truck, usually within hours of a snowfall. I did it as a community service, never asking for payment or recognition. The roads connected to the main entrance and provided crucial access to about 30 homes in the back section of the development. Without regular plowing, residents would be effectively trapped during heavy snowstorms, and emergency vehicles couldn't reach them. Patricia had never thanked me for this service. In fact, I wasn't sure she even realized I was doing it. But now, as I looked at the citation on my kitchen table, an idea began forming in my mind. On Monday morning, I drove to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the community clubhouse. Patricia was there naturally, sorting through paperwork with the focused intensity of someone who genuinely enjoyed bureaucratic power. "Mr. Reinhardt," she said without looking up, "I assume you're here to submit your payment." "Actually, I'm here to inform you that I'll be discontinuing my volunteer snow removal services for the fire access roads," I said calmly. That got her attention. Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me, the fire access roads," I repeated. "Boulder Creek Drive, Aspen Loop, and Pinecone Court. I've been plowing those roads for the past 2 winters using my truck. Since the HOA has now informed me that using my mechanical plow is a violation of community standards, I won't be doing that anymore." Patricia's face went through several interesting color changes. "Those roads need to be maintained for emergency access." "They certainly do," I agreed. "I'm sure you have a contractor lined up for that service. I just wanted to make sure you were aware that I'll no longer be handling it." "You've been plowing those roads without authorization," she demanded. "I was providing a free service to the community," I said. "But since my snow removal methods are apparently unacceptable, I thought it best to stop entirely. Wouldn't want to violate any more bylaws." I could see the gears turning behind her eyes as she processed the implications. "We have a contractor for the main roads," she said slowly. "Great. I'm sure they can add the fire access roads to their route. Have a good day, Patricia." I left before she could respond, feeling a small sense of satisfaction. It wasn't much, but at least I wasn't going to keep helping an organization that was actively fining me for helping. The next snowfall came 4 days later. It was a beauty, one of those overnight dumps that left nearly 18 inches of fresh powder across the entire area. I woke up early, had my coffee while watching the snow continue to fall, and then fired up my truck. Using a snow shovel, like the HOA apparently preferred, I cleared my driveway by hand. It took 3 hours of backbreaking work, but I did it according to their precious bylaws. As I finished exhausted and sweating despite the cold, I noticed several of my neighbors staring at me like I had lost my mind. Frank walked over, his own driveway still buried under snow. "What are you doing, Lucas?" he asked. "Following the rules," I said, leaning on my shovel. "Patricia wants hand tools only, so that's what I'm using." "This is insane. It'll take me all day to clear mine." "Probably," I agreed. "But hey, at least we won't get fined." Frank glanced toward the back section of the development where the fire access roads wound through the properties. "Those roads aren't getting plowed." "Not my problem anymore," I said. By noon, the situation had escalated. The HOA's regular contractor had plowed the main entrance and the primary streets, but they had not touched the fire access roads. According to Frank, who had called to ask, the contractor claimed those roads weren't part of their agreement. They would require an additional fee and couldn't get to them until the following day at the earliest. Patricia called an emergency board meeting that evening. I wasn't invited, but Frank attended since he was technically still in good standing with his fine unpaid but not yet overdue. He filled me in afterward at my kitchen table, his expression somewhere between amused and concerned. "She's furious," Frank said. "Patricia spent the entire meeting complaining about you, said you were being deliberately obstructive and endangering the community." "I'm following her rules," I pointed out. "She told me I couldn't use my plow." "She wants you to plow the fire roads but pay the fine for plowing your own driveway," Frank said. "She actually suggested that as a compromise." I laughed, a sharp bark of sound. "Absolutely not. She can't have it both ways." "There's more," Frank continued. "A couple of residents from the back section showed up and complained that they couldn't get out. One of them has a medical condition and needs to be able to reach the hospital quickly if there's an emergency. Patricia promised she would handle it. How, she didn't say. But she was making phone calls when I left. The next morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. The letter demanded immediate payment of the $500 fine, plus an additional $200 in administrative fees. It also included a strongly worded paragraph about my duty to maintain community safety, and suggested that my refusal to plow the fire access roads could result in personal liability if an emergency occurred. I took the letter to a real estate attorney in Denver named Sarah Chen, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in HOA disputes. Her office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel, and she listened to my story while taking meticulous notes. "They don't have a leg to stand on," Sarah said after I finished. "First, the fine itself is questionable. Snow removal methodology isn't typically something an HOA can regulate on private driveways, especially when it doesn't cause actual damage. Second, they can't compel you to perform volunteer services for the association. Those fire roads are the HOA's responsibility, not yours." "So what do I do?" I asked. "Don't pay the fine," she said firmly. "I'll send them a letter explaining that we dispute the citation on several legal grounds. As for the fire roads, continue to refuse service. Document everything. If they try to take legal action, we'll countersue for harassment and improper enforcement of the bylaws. I left Sarah's office feeling more confident. She sent her letter the next day, and based on Frank's reports, Patricia was absolutely livid when she received it. The HOA board held another meeting, this time consulting with their own attorney, and things went quiet for about a week. Then we got hit with another major snowstorm. This one was worse than the first, a genuine blizzard that dumped nearly 2 feet of snow over the course of 36 hours. The county declared a snow emergency, and only essential travel was permitted. I spent the time holed up in my house, warm and comfortable, watching movies and enjoying the forced break from work. On the second day, someone started pounding on my front door around 2 in the afternoon. I opened it to find Patricia standing there, her face red from cold and exertion. She looked like she had walked through the snowdrifts to reach my house, and she probably had, since the fire access roads were undoubtedly still buried. "You need to plow the roads," she said without preamble. "Right now." "No, I don't," I replied calmly. "There's a medical emergency," Patricia said, her voice rising. "Ellen Kowalski in the back section is having chest pains. The ambulance can't get through." My stomach dropped. "Did you call 911? "Of course we did. They said they'll send a snowcat, but it could be an hour or more." "If you would just plow the damn roads, you fined me for using my plow," I interrupted. "You told me it violated community standards. Which is it, Patricia? Is my plowing acceptable or not?" Her jaw worked, fury and desperation warring on her face. "I'll waive the fine. Just help her." "Put it in writing," I said. "What?" "Put it in writing that the fine is waived and that I'm authorized to use my plow for snow removal, both on my property and on the fire access roads. Sign it and date it. Then I'll help." Patricia looked like she wanted to strangle me, but she pushed past into my house without invitation. "Give me paper." I provided a notebook and pen, and she scrawled out a hasty agreement waiving my fine and authorizing my snow removal services. Her signature was barely legible, slashed across the bottom of the page. I took a photo of it with my phone before folding it and putting it in my pocket. "Let's go," I said, grabbing my keys and coat. My truck started with a reassuring rumble, and I had the plow down within seconds. The snow was deep, wet, and heavy, the worst kind for plowing, but my truck was up to the task. I started at Boulder Creek Drive, pushing through the accumulation with steady determination. The road appeared gradually, like I was excavating it from beneath a white blanket. Patricia followed in her BMW, which was hilariously inadequate for the conditions. She kept getting stuck, spinning her wheels uselessly, until I finally told her to go back home. She refused at first but eventually gave up when her car became hopelessly lodged in a drift. It took me 45 minutes to clear all 3 fire access roads. By the time I reached Ellen Kowalski's house on Pinecone Court, the ambulance had arrived via the main entrance, having used tire chains and taken a longer route. The paramedics were loading Ellen onto a gurney, and her husband, a frail-looking man in his 70s, stood watching with terrified eyes. "Is she okay?" I called out. One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, gave me a thumbs up. "We got here in time." "Looks like angina, not a heart attack. She'll be fine." Relief washed over me. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been until that moment. Ellen's husband, whose name I learned was Thomas, came over as the ambulance prepared to leave. "Thank you for clearing the road," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "It's okay," I said gently. "I'm just glad she's going to be all right." "That woman from the HOA said you refused to help at first," Thomas said, confusion in his eyes. "But you're here now." "It's complicated," I said. The important thing is that Ellen is getting care. The ambulance left, lights flashing as it made its way carefully down the now cleared roads. I finished ensuring all the routes were passable and then returned home, exhausted but satisfied. My phone had several missed calls from Patricia, which I ignored. The fallout began the next day. Word had spread through the community about what happened, but the story had become garbled in transmission. Some people heard that I had refused to help during a medical emergency. Others heard that the HOA had prevented me from helping. Frank worked overtime trying to set the record straight, but rumors are hard to kill once they start spreading. I received an email from Patricia requesting my presence at the next HOA board meeting to discuss community safety concerns. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the clubhouse. Sarah Chen advised me to attend, armed with documentation of everything that had transpired. The clubhouse was packed when I arrived. Apparently, news of the meeting had spread, and residents wanted to hear what would happen. I recognized most of the faces, neighbors I had waved to or chatted with over the years. The atmosphere was tense, curious. Patricia sat at the head table with 4 other board members. Margaret Simmons, the vice president, Robert Young, the treasurer, Deanna Foster, the secretary, and Keith Chambers, a member at large. They all wore serious expressions, though Margaret kept shooting me sympathetic glances. "This meeting is called to order," Patricia announced, banging a gavel unnecessarily hard. "We're here to address recent events regarding snow removal and community safety. Mr. Reinhardt, please come forward." I walked to the front of the room, very aware of all the eyes on me. Sarah had advised me to stay calm, stick to facts, and let Patricia dig her own hole. "Mr. Reinhardt," Patricia began, her voice dripping with false professionalism, "you recently refused to provide snow removal services during a medical emergency, endangering the life of a community member. What do you have to say for yourself?" "That's not accurate," I said clearly. "I was never employed or contracted to provide snow removal services for the HOA. For the past 2 winters, I volunteered to plow the fire access roads as a courtesy. When you fined me $500 for using my plow on my own driveway, I informed you that I would no longer volunteer this service." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Patricia's face tightened. "You had a responsibility." "No, I didn't," I interrupted. "The HOA has a responsibility to maintain those fire roads. I was helping for free. You decided my help was unacceptable." Robert Young, the treasurer, leaned forward. "Patricia, is this true? You fined him for plowing his own driveway." "He was violating the bylaws," Patricia snapped. "Section 12 clearly prohibits—" "Let me see that section," Margaret Simmons said, holding out her hand for Patricia's binder. Patricia reluctantly passed it over. Margaret read silently for a moment, her frown deepening. "Patricia, this section says residents should use approved methods for snow removal. It doesn't specifically prohibit mechanical plowing." "The board interpretation. Did the board vote on interpreting this rule?" Margaret asked sharply. Silence. Patricia's face was turning red. "I made an executive decision based on the spirit of the bylaws." "You can't make executive decisions like that without board approval," Robert said, shaking his head. "That's not how this works." Diana Foster spoke up for the first time, her voice quiet but firm. "I was never consulted about any fine against Mr. Reinhardt." "Patricia, did you issue this citation on your own?" The room had gone very quiet. Patricia looked like a cornered animal, her eyes darting between her fellow board members. "I have the authority as president to enforce community standards." "Not unilaterally," Margaret said, "and certainly not when it puts the community at risk." Mr. Reinhardt was providing a valuable service for free, and you drove him away over a bogus fine. It wasn't bogus. Patricia's voice rose, her composure cracking. He was making the neighborhood look inconsistent. Inconsistent. Someone called out from the audience. It was Thomas Kowalski, Ellen's husband. He stood up, still looking tired but steadier than when I'd last seen him. My wife nearly died because you were worried about appearance. Is that what you're saying? That's not what I meant. Lucas cleared those roads when the rest of you couldn't, Thomas continued, his voice gaining strength. He came as soon as Patricia agreed to waive that ridiculous fine. If he hadn't, the ambulance might not have gotten to Ellen in time. And you want to blame him? The crowd erupted into arguments, people shouting questions and accusations. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, but it was too late. The meeting devolved into chaos, and eventually Margaret Simmons called for an adjournment. We'll reconvene next week after the board has had time to review these issues internally, Margaret announced. Meeting adjourned. I left the clubhouse surrounded by neighbors thanking me and shaking my hand. Frank clapped me on the shoulder, grinning widely. That went better than expected, he said. It's not over yet, I warned. Patricia isn't going to let this go. I was right. Over the next week, Patricia launched what could only be described as a smear campaign. She sent emails to residents claiming I had been negligent and reckless. She posted on the community Facebook page about entitled homeowners who endanger others. She even tried to organize a petition to have me removed from the community, though it gained no traction. What Patricia didn't know was that Margaret Simmons had reached out to me privately. We met at a coffee shop in Golden, away from prying eyes. The board is preparing to remove Patricia as president, Margaret told me over a latte. We've been documenting her behavior for months. This situation with you was just the final straw. What behavior? I asked. Margaret sighed heavily. Patricia has been abusing her position since she was elected 3 years ago. She's issued fines without board approval, used HOA funds for personal expenses, and created an atmosphere of fear among residents. People are afraid to speak up because she retaliates. Why hasn't anyone stopped her before? Fear, mostly. And she's good at covering her tracks. But this time she went too far, endangering Ellen Kowalski's life over an aesthetic preference. That's indefensible. We're calling a special election to remove her and install new leadership. What can I do to help? I asked. Just keep doing what you're doing. Be available to plow those roads when needed. Show the community what real service looks like. The special meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, we got another snowstorm, this one moderate at about 8 inches. I plowed my driveway with my truck, taking my time and doing it properly. Then I cleared the fire access roads without being asked. Several residents came out to thank me personally, and someone left a plate of homemade cookies on my doorstep. Patricia, meanwhile, had become increasingly erratic. She showed up at my house twice, demanding to know what I had told the other board members. She accused me of conspiring against her and threatened legal action. I documented every encounter, taking notes and saving voice messages. The special meeting arrived on a cold Thursday evening. The clubhouse was even more packed than before, with standing room only. The air was electric with anticipation. Patricia sat at the head table looking haggard, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. Margaret Simmons called the meeting to order. Tonight we'll be voting on a motion to remove Patricia Brennan as HOA president due to abuse of authority and violation of her fiduciary duties. Patricia has been given the opportunity to respond to these allegations. Patricia stood, clutching her binder like a shield. "This is a witch hunt," she began, her voice shaking with emotion. "I have served this community faithfully for 3 years. I've made tough decisions to maintain our property values and uphold our standards. If people don't like that, it's because they don't understand what it takes to run an organization like this." "Patricia," Margaret said gently, "you issued fines without board approval. You spent HOA money on personal items. You created a hostile environment for residents. These aren't opinions. They're facts supported by documentation." "What documentation?" Patricia demanded. Robert Young stood and held up a thick folder. "Bank statements showing charges to restaurants and shops that you claimed were HOA expenses. Email threads where you threatened residents who disagreed with you. Records of fines you issued without bringing them to the board. Should I continue?" Patricia's face went pale. "Those expenses were legitimate. I was conducting HOA business." "At a spa?" Robert asked, raising an eyebrow. "At a luxury boutique. Patricia, you spent over $3,000 in HOA funds on personal items last year alone." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Patricia tried to respond, but her words came out jumbled, defensive, increasingly desperate. She pointed at me suddenly. "This is all his fault. He turned the board against me. He refused to help during an emergency." "That's a lie," Thomas Kowalski said loudly from his seat. "Lucas saved my wife's life. You're the one who created the emergency by fining him in the first place." Margaret banged the gavel. "We're going to vote now. All in favor of removing Patricia Brennan as HOA president, say aye." A chorus of ayes filled the room, coming not just from the board but from the assembled residents. The motion passed unanimously among the board members, and Patricia's face crumpled. She grabbed her binder and her purse and rushed out of the clubhouse without another word, the door slamming behind her. The room burst into applause. Margaret smiled, though she looked tired. "Keith Chambers will serve as interim president until we can hold proper elections next month. In the meantime, I'd like to make a motion to officially hire Lucas Reinhardt as our snow removal contractor for the fire access roads, with appropriate compensation." "Seconded," Deanna Foster said immediately. The motion passed, and suddenly I was being congratulated by dozens of people. It was overwhelming in the best way. Frank found me in the crowd and pulled me into a bear hug. "You did it, you crazy bastard," he said, laughing. "You actually did it." "We all did it," I corrected. "The HOA offered me a fair contract for snow removal services, which I accepted. More importantly, they rescinded the ridiculous fine and formally amended the bylaws to allow residents to use mechanical equipment for snow removal on their own properties." It was a complete victory, though it felt strange to have it all resolved so definitively. Patricia, however, wasn't finished. 3 days after her removal, I received a lawsuit notification. She was suing me personally for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress, claiming that I had orchestrated a campaign to destroy her reputation and cause her mental anguish. The lawsuit asked for $50,000 in damages. Sarah Chen nearly laughed when I showed her the documents. "This is frivolous," she said. "She has no case, but will need to respond formally. This is going to cost her a lot of money in legal fees for nothing." "Why would she do this?" I asked. "Revenge," Sarah said simply. "She lost everything, her position, her power, her reputation. In her mind, you're responsible. This is her way of lashing out." We filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that Patricia's claims had no legal merit. I had never defamed her. I had simply told the truth about what happened. As for emotional distress, her own actions had caused her downfall, not mine. The judge agreed and dismissed the case within 6 weeks, ordering Patricia to pay my legal fees. That should have been the end of it, but Life is rarely that neat. A few weeks after the lawsuit was dismissed, Robert Young discovered something disturbing while conducting an audit of HOA finances. Patricia had been embezzling funds for over 2 years, using a series of shell invoices and fake vendors to siphon money into her personal accounts. The total amount was nearly $28,000. The board held an emergency meeting and voted to report Patricia to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. I wasn't directly involved in this decision, but I attended the meeting as a concerned community member. The atmosphere was somber. Nobody wanted to see a neighbor go to jail, but the theft was too significant to ignore. Detective Maria Hernandez from the Economic Crimes Unit took the case. She was thorough and professional, interviewing board members and reviewing financial records. The evidence against Patricia was overwhelming. She had been incredibly sloppy, perhaps believing that nobody would ever question her authority enough to look closely at the books. Patricia was arrested on a Tuesday morning in March. I happened to be driving past her house when the sheriff's deputies arrived. I didn't stop, didn't slow down, just kept going. There was no satisfaction in seeing her led away in handcuffs, just a sense of sadness that it had come to this. The trial took place in August. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that the expenses were legitimate, that there had been misunderstandings and poor record keeping, but the prosecution had receipts, bank records, and testimony from board members. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on multiple counts of theft and embezzlement. Patricia was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her husband, who had been largely absent from the entire drama, filed for divorce shortly after the sentencing. Their house went on the market in September and sold quickly, probably at a loss given the circumstances. Life in Pine Ridge Estates gradually returned to normal. Keith Chambers was elected as the permanent HOA president, and he ran the organization with transparency and common sense. The bylaws were comprehensively reviewed and updated, with input from residents. The atmosphere in the community improved dramatically, with people actually smiling and chatting at neighborhood gatherings instead of walking on eggshells. I continued plowing the fire access roads throughout the winter, now properly compensated for my time and equipment. The HOA also hired me to handle overflow work on the main roads during particularly heavy snowfalls. My snow removal business expanded, with several other developments in the area reaching out after hearing about the situation at Pine Ridge. Frank Morrison became something of a legend in the community for standing by me throughout the ordeal. He was elected to the HOA board in the spring elections and worked to ensure that the mistakes of the Patricia era would never be repeated. Ellen Kowalski made a full recovery, and she and Thomas became good friends of mine. They invited me over for dinner regularly, and Ellen always made sure I left with containers of her incredible pierogi. Thomas told me repeatedly that I had saved Ellen's life, though I always deflected the praise. I had just done what anyone would have done, once the obstacles were removed. The lawsuit against me being dismissed with prejudice meant Patricia couldn't refile the same claims. The judgment ordering her to pay my legal fees remained unpaid, of course, since she had no money, but Sarah Chen said it would remain on her record indefinitely. If Patricia ever came into money in the future, the debt would still be there. I ran into Margaret Simmons at the grocery store in December, almost a year after everything had started. We grabbed coffee in the store's cafe and talked about how much had changed. "You know what the irony is?" Margaret said, stirring cream into her coffee. "Patricia could have been a good president if she had just listened to people. She had organizational skills and genuine passion for the community, but she let power go to her head. People forget that being a leader means serving others, not ruling them, I said. Exactly. And that's what you showed everyone. You were willing to walk away from helping rather than be taken advantage of. But the moment there was a real emergency, you were there. That's real character. I felt embarrassed by the praise but grateful for it too. The whole experience had taught me a lot about standing up for yourself, about community, and about the dangers of unchecked authority in even small organizations like an HOA. The second winter after everything went down was remarkably peaceful. I plowed when it snowed, attended the occasional HOA meeting to stay informed, and enjoyed living in a community that felt genuinely friendly for the first time since I'd moved in. Frank and I started a tradition of grilling together every Sunday during the summer, inviting neighbors over for informal gatherings that felt organic rather than obligatory. One afternoon in January, I was plowing Boulder Creek Drive after a fresh snowfall when a car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, revealing a young couple I didn't recognize. "Are you Lucas?" the woman asked. "That's me," I said, keeping the truck idling. "We just bought Patricia Brennan's old house," she explained. "The realtor told us about what happened. We wanted to say thank you for standing up to her. Sounds like you made this neighborhood a better place." "Just did what needed doing," I said. "Welcome to Pine Ridge Estates." They drove off, and I continued plowing, thinking about how strange life could be. A year and a half ago, I never could have imagined that clearing snow would lead to exposing embezzlement, changing community leadership, and ultimately making lasting friendships. But that's exactly what had happened. That evening, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The snow-covered landscape glowed pink and orange, and smoke rose from chimneys throughout the neighborhood. Kids were sledding on the hill near the clubhouse, their laughter carrying on the cold air. This was what a community was supposed to feel like. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Board meeting next week. They want to give you a formal thank you plaque. Sorry in advance." I chuckled and typed back, "Tell them to donate to the volunteer fire department instead." He replied immediately, "Already suggested that. They're doing both. You're stuck with the plaque, buddy." As I looked out at the peaceful neighborhood, I realized that the whole ordeal had been worth it. Not just because Patricia had been stopped and justice had been served, but because the community had learned something important about accountability, leadership, and standing up for what's right. The HOA was no longer a source of fear and frustration, but an actual organization that served the residents' interests. The fire access roads I had fought to maintain had become a symbol of something larger. The idea that rules should make sense, that authority should be questioned when it's abused, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop enabling dysfunction. I finished my beer and headed inside, where my own fireplace was crackling warmly. Tomorrow there might be more snow to plow, more work to be done, more challenges to face. But tonight, everything was exactly as it should be. The plaque ceremony happened the following Tuesday, and despite my protests, it was actually a nice event. The board presented me with an engraved wooden plaque thanking me for dedicated service and unwavering commitment to community safety. They also made a $1,000 donation to the volunteer fire department in my name, which meant a lot more than the plaque. Thomas and Ellen Kowalski attended, and Ellen gave a short speech about how grateful she was for my help during her medical emergency. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when she finished. Thomas shook my hand so firmly I thought he might dislocate something. "You're a good man, Lucas," he said simply. As I drove home that night, the plaque sitting on my passenger seat, I reflected on the entire journey. It had started with something so small, a stupid fine for using my snow plow, and escalated into something that changed an entire community. Patricia Brennan had tried to exert control through petty rules and intimidation, but she had picked the wrong battle with the wrong person. I wasn't anyone special. I was just a guy who ran a snow removal business and didn't like being pushed around. But sometimes that's all it takes to spark real change. One person willing to say no to injustice, even when it would be easier to comply. The winter continued with its usual rhythm of snowstorms and clear days. I plowed the fire access roads after each significant snowfall, always making sure they were passable within hours. The HOA paid me promptly, and the relationship was professional and respectful. Keith Chambers ran the board efficiently, and decisions were made transparently with input from residents. In April, as the snow finally began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, I received a letter from the Colorado HOA Forum, a statewide organization that provided resources and training for homeowners associations. They had heard about the situation at Pine Ridge Estates and wanted to use it as a case study in their training materials about proper governance and avoiding conflicts of interest. I agreed to let them tell the story, with the hope that other communities might learn from what had happened. If Patricia's downfall could prevent even one other HOA president from abusing their power, then maybe some good would come from the whole mess. Sarah Chen called me in May with unexpected news. "Patricia is filing for bankruptcy," she said. "The restitution order, the legal fees she owes you, everything. She's trying to discharge it all." "Can she do that?" I asked. "Some of it, yes. But restitution ordered as part of a criminal sentence usually can't be discharged. She'll still owe the HOA that money. As for your legal fees, that might get wiped out, but honestly, you weren't going to collect from her anyway." "I figured as much," I said. "I'm not in this for the money, I know, but I wanted you to be aware. Also, her attorney reached out to see if you'd be willing to write a letter supporting leniency when she goes up for parole. I told him absolutely not, but I wanted to check with you first." "Yeah, that's not happening," I said firmly. She had every opportunity to make things right, and instead she doubled down, sued me, and tried to destroy my reputation. She can serve her time. That's what I thought, just wanted to confirm. Summer arrived in full force, transforming the snow-covered landscape into green meadows dotted with wildflowers. My snow removal business went quiet for the season, but I picked up landscaping work to fill the gap. The mountains were beautiful, and I felt fortunate to live in such an incredible place. In August, Keith Chambers asked me to join the HOA board as a member at large. I was hesitant at first, remembering all the drama and conflict, but Frank convinced me it would be good to have someone with my perspective involved in decision-making. "You understand what it's like to be on the receiving end of bad HOA policies," Frank argued. "That makes you valuable. Plus, you actually care about the community, not about power." I accepted the position and was appointed during the September meeting. My first act as a board member was to propose eliminating several outdated and unnecessarily restrictive rules from the bylaws. The board agreed, and we streamlined the regulations to focus on genuine community concerns rather than aesthetic micromanagement. One of the rules we eliminated was the one Patricia had used to fine me in the first place. Section 12 was rewritten to simply state that snow removal should be conducted safely and should not damage common areas or neighboring properties. No more restrictions on methodology, no more arbitrary enforcement. The changes were popular with residents, and the community felt more relaxed as a result. People could paint their front doors different colors, plant whatever flowers they wanted, and generally enjoy their properties without fear of petty citations. The HOA focused on important things like road maintenance, common area upkeep, and organizing community events. Patricia was released from prison in December after serving 12 months of her 18-month sentence, reduced for good behavior. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved to Arizona to live with her sister and was working as a receptionist at a dental office. Her social media presence had vanished entirely, and she seemed to be keeping a very low profile. I felt no animosity toward her at that point, just a vague sense of relief that the chapter was fully closed. She had faced consequences for her actions, and hopefully she had learned from the experience. I certainly had learned from mine. The third winter was starting to roll in as the years progressed, and I prepared my equipment for another season of snow removal. The fire access roads were now officially designated as critical infrastructure, with regular inspections from the fire department to ensure they remained clear and accessible. I took pride in maintaining them, knowing that they could literally save lives. On Christmas Eve, I was stringing lights on my porch when Ellen Kowalski walked over with a wrapped package. She was bundled up against the cold, her breath misting in the frigid air. "Merry Christmas, Lucas," she said warmly, handing me the package. "Ellen, you didn't have to get me anything," I protested. "Just open it." Inside was a beautiful hand-knitted scarf in shades of blue and gray, clearly made with care and skill. "Ellen, this is incredible. Did you make this?" "I did. Took me 3 months. It's a thank you for everything you did. Not just plowing the roads, but for being willing to stand up when it mattered. You gave this community back to the people who live here." I hugged her carefully, mindful of her recent health issues. "Thank you, Ellen. This means more than you know." As she walked back to her house, I wrapped the scarf around my neck. It was warm and soft, and it felt like a physical manifestation of community, of caring, of people looking out for each other. That's what Pine Ridge Estates had become in the years since Patricia's reign had ended. New Year's Eve found me at Frank's house for a neighborhood party. About 20 people showed up, filling his living room with laughter and conversation. At midnight, we stepped outside to watch fireworks being set off somewhere in the valley below, the colorful explosions reflecting off the snow. "To a good year," Frank said, raising his glass. "To a good community," I added, and everyone cheered. As I drove home that night, carefully navigating the icy roads, I thought about how much had changed since that Tuesday morning when Patricia had marched over to find me for plowing my driveway. The confrontation had seemed so petty at the time, so ridiculous, but it had exposed deeper problems in the community's leadership and given everyone a chance to reset. I had never set out to be a community activist or whistleblower. I just wanted to clear my driveway efficiently and help out my neighbors. But sometimes life pushes you into situations where you have to make a choice: accept injustice or fight back. I had chosen to fight, not with aggression or revenge, but simply by refusing to participate in a system that made no sense. The fire access roads remained clear all winter, and no emergencies required their use, which was the best possible outcome. My work as an HOA board member continued, focused on practical solutions to real problems rather than enforcing arbitrary rules. The community thrived, with new families moving in and longtime residents expressing renewed pride in the neighborhood. Patricia Brennan became a cautionary tale, the example of what happens when someone lets a small amount of power corrupt them completely. But more than that, the entire experience became a lesson in the importance of accountability, transparency, and community involvement. Residents now paid attention to HOA meetings, asked questions, and held leadership responsible. The days of rubber stamping decisions were over. Years passed, and Pine Ridge Estates continued to grow and evolve. I eventually stepped down from the HOA board after serving 3 years, feeling that I had contributed what I could and wanting to let fresh perspectives take over. My snow removal business expanded to serve multiple communities throughout Jefferson County, and I hired 2 employees to help manage the workload. Frank retired fully and spent his winters in Florida, escaping the cold he had dealt with for decades as a firefighter. We stayed in touch, talking regularly on the phone and getting together whenever he was back in Colorado. Ellen and Thomas remained close friends, and Ellen's pierogi became legendary at community potlucks. The plaque the HOA had given me hung in my garage, right next to my tool bench. I saw it every day, a reminder of that strange, difficult, ultimately rewarding period of my life, when standing up for a simple principle had changed everything. On the 5th anniversary of Patricia's removal from office, Keith Chambers organized a small ceremony to celebrate what the community had become. It wasn't about gloating over Patricia's downfall, but rather acknowledging how far Pine Ridge Estates had come in creating a positive, supportive environment for residents. I gave a brief speech, talking about the importance of community and mutual respect. "We all have to live together," I said, looking out at the assembled neighbors, many of whom had become genuine friends over the years. The HOA exists to make that easier, not harder. When we remember that we're all on the same team, trying to build good lives in a beautiful place, everything else falls into place. The applause was warm and genuine, and afterward, people came up to share their own stories about how the community had improved. The changes went beyond just snow removal policies. The entire culture had shifted from fear and compliance to cooperation and mutual support. As I drove home that evening, the sun setting behind the mountains in a spectacular display of purple and gold, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The battle with Patricia had been difficult and sometimes frightening, but it had been worth it. The community was better for what had happened, and I was better too, having learned that standing up for yourself doesn't make you a troublemaker. It makes you a citizen. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen, whom I hadn't heard from in over a year. "Saw the article about the Pine Ridge anniversary. Proud of you, Lucas. You did good." I smiled and typed back, "We all did. Thanks for the help when it mattered." The fire access roads remained a priority for the HOA, always kept clear, always maintained. They were never named after me, which was fine. I had no need for that kind of recognition. But everyone knew that I had fought to protect them, that I had been willing to sacrifice convenience and comfort to ensure the community stayed safe. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer, the same ritual I had performed countless times over the years. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, with lights glowing in windows and smoke rising from chimneys. This was home, a place where people looked out for each other, where leadership served rather than ruled, where common sense prevailed over petty power plays. Snow began to fall as I sat there, light flakes drifting down through the darkness. By morning, there would be a fresh coating on everything, and I would be out with my plow, clearing the roads and driveways, doing the work I loved in a community I had helped to heal. It was a good life, built on the simple foundation of standing up for what was right and refusing to back down when it mattered most. The story of how I had fought the HOA, and one became something of a local legend, told to new residents as an example of community values. But to me, it was never about winning or losing. It was about maintaining dignity, refusing to be bullied and remembering that rules should serve people, not the other way around. As the snow continued to fall, I raised my beer in a silent toast to everyone who had stood with me during those difficult months, to Ellen and Thomas, to Frank and Margaret, and all the others who had refused to accept tyranny disguised as governance. We had built something good together, something that would last long after all of us were gone. The fire access roads would always be clear. The community would continue to thrive. And somewhere in Arizona, Patricia Brennan was hopefully living a better life, having learned the hard way that power without accountability always leads to disaster. I hoped she had found peace, because I certainly had. The snow fell silently through the night, blanketing Pine Ridge estates in white, and when morning came, I would be there with my plow, doing what I had always done, serving my community, protecting my neighbors, and maintaining the roads that might someday save a life. It was simple work, honest work, and it was enough.